Hi, everyone. I wanted to give you a few ideas about causation or causality in um, in history, because you have to write about that in your paper. So, just a few other thoughts that you may want to um, consider. I want to give you an example here of different factors. Causation in history is complex. It's trying to answer the question of why. And of course, it's been pointed out by many people, surely, that in history you can't go back and run the experiment again. You can't, set everything up right before World War One and see if it would happen the same way again. We only get one shot at it, and then we kind of are doing everything after the fact. We are looking at sources. We're looking at other people's interpretations, and so then we have to try to decide what happened, why. And there's always going to be disputes, debates about this, but that's not a bad thing. But part of the reason that there's going to be disputes, and part of the reason why I'm asking this question and then accept a number of different answers, is that different people have different views about what is the most important factor driving history. Okay, you've read about Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto. Marx is a classic example of an economic determinist, right? Somebody who thinks that economics are the most important factor. Indeed, everything else just grows out of economics, even philosophy and religion and all those art, all those kinds of things that might be thought of as, different from economics. Well, Marx said that they all just reflect the ideas of the ruling class. Okay. Other people are more interested in thinking about the quest for power, political power, as a great driving factor in history, especially in the relationships between countries. Others see religious factors or intellectual factors as more important, social structure, and so there's just all sorts of different ways to think about causation. And drawing on Carl Gustafson and Richard Evans here, especially, one of the big things is to think, okay, we've got our um, causation, our thoughts about causes. How can we support these causes with evidence? If I think that um, a certain cause is most important, how am I going to show that with evidence? How am I going to show that there's actual, real evidence to support it? Okay, based on the sources. And if it's just sort of a hunch, then it's not going to be a real successful argument. Um, and that's why it's important to use sources to be persuasive. Now, your question is about World War One. I want to go through in this video thinking about imperialism, new imperialism. And you may remember from development 3.3 that there are a number of different causes that are offered for the new imperialism. Um, Different historians have talked about different um, reasons for it. One is economic factors. Okay, economic factors oftentimes boil down to wanting more resources for uh, your nation state, or for your country. The political leaders. This focuses on political leaders who are saying, "All right, let's figure out how we're going to get more resources, like rubber or um, ivory, things like that, cotton, access to cotton plantations, and how are we going to get more of that for our factories and businesses, so then they can make products out of those and sell them and bring more economic prosperity to our country." I mentioned in 3.3 that countries were taking more responsibility for their economy, and so if the government's saying we can, you know, get economic prosperity, well, you got to figure out some way to make it happen. Um, and one way that some leaders think they can do that is to engage in new imperialism. The other aspect, of course, is to have markets to sell to. And so we can say, well, we're going to sell the products to the Indians who we control, the people of India, the British, in the case of the British, or the people of Vietnam, in the case of the French. Okay, so economic factors are really important, it seems. Um, but not everybody thinks those are necessarily the most important. Another possible cause is cultural reasons, sense of European cultural superiority, um, and the idea that peoples around the world who are not European or American could be civilized or conquered, one of the two. Well, conquered in either case, but civilized or then conquered and struggled against to increase the fitness of the conquering people in a social Darwinist sense. Those would be cultural ideas. And then third, we have the political power kind of ideas, um, stretching a navy around the world, um, being able to have these naval bases and political in the Pacific, excuse me, um, being able to um, sort of stretch the power around the world, be able to have the flag of your nation around the world. Um, and so all these are possible factors. There's good arguments for each. Um, Economics, certainly we've seen the Industrial Revolution, right? For tracing this economic argument back, like why is this a big deal? Well, the Industrial Revolutions occurred. Um, the European factories are um, making a lot of products, and there's an idea to expand that. Those factors also are going to make European um, countries more able to survive in the imperial ventures, whether by giving them more lethal weapons or by producing quinine, which is a malaria medicine that allows Europeans to penetrate further into the African continent. And so economic arguments have a pretty strong one, strong argument. And you could say not only did economic gain propel um, conquest, new imperialism, but also economic factors make it more possible because of machine guns and mass produced rifles and mass produced quinine, things like that. Okay, so economic arguments are good. Um, Political factors also are important here um, because this is a period, as we've seen, of competing nation states. We see this leading up to World War One too, right? So competition of France and Germany and Britain um, for power, the desire of Britain to catch up to Britain and France, and to also have its colonies, its place in the sun, as Kaiser Wilhelm II put it. You can see that in Development 3.4. So there's a lot of competition, and this seems to be driving um, the new imperialism. Um, and then we can think about the civilization and culture. I don't think this one is as strong, but somebody might look at it a different way. Okay. I think that civilizational cultural arguments were probably stronger, not as much for the decision makers as for a way to justify it. That's my thought. It seems hard to argue that the cultural factors would have been the driving force in the sense that this would be expensive and dangerous and all that kind of thing. And to say we're just doing it to civilize doesn't seem to fit the political decision making process. But on the other hand, you have a poem like The White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling. You have certain kinds of efforts to educate, civilize, to bring Christianity to people that people do get involved in. Okay, and so I don't think that's the strongest factor, but it should be considered, and somebody could make a good argument for it probably. Um, and then your book also points out, Forging the Modern World points out that there's local reasons too. And one of the dangers in thinking about causes is to say, well, there's one cause that explains everything. It's all economic or it's all political. But what about the local decisions? What about, was there difference in the way that the British did their empire building versus the Germans or um, the French, the Dutch? And how do we try to look at some of the complexity there too? Um, And so what kind of sources are you going to use for this? Well, you would have to look again at the kinds of the poems and sources that we have in class. You look at the textbook, you look at the bigger picture of what kind of changes European societies were undergoing. And then you can start to tie your reasons to them. And maybe you go in with a reason thinking, this is it. And no, the evidence doesn't support it. And so tying down your causes with evidence is definitely important. Now, what if we're saying, what's the most important factor in imperialism? Why do we go from Europe controlling, yes, some areas in Africa, like on the coasts, kind of rooting back, going back into the older trading post days where there was slave trading posts. There's some trading posts in India, um, around in Asia, and by the end of the 1900s, by the beginning of by the end of the 1800s, by the beginning of the 20th century, almost all of Africa is under European domination. Seems like the Industrial Revolution has to play a big role there. Like, what made this possible? Okay, um, and the weapons, the ability to survive using modern medicine, these probably played a really important role. Um, and so, one of the things that Carl Gustafson points out in his little book, A Preface to History, in the chapter on causation, is to think, well, what's changed? Um, is there anything that's changed that really kind of stands out here? And the the Industrial Revolution, it seems to be a big change between the new imperialism and the older imperialism of the building of empires in the Americas and the trading post empires. What is it about the 1800s kind of imperialism that's different? And the big scale, the extensive nature of it, as Forging the Modern World puts it, and the intensive nature of it allows Europeans to do quite a lot more. A lot of that seems to be based on technology and perhaps also the development of the nation state and these ability to govern at a closer level, to get more into its subjects' lives. And so those would be some examples of how causation could be thought of. All right. If if you have any more questions or anything, I'd be glad to answer. Hope this is helpful for you. Thanks.